Story 1. Vile Designs. Greetings, reader. It's a strange fact about the modern age that in order for a thing's existence to be confirmed, you cannot trust to your own five senses anymore. In order for reality to be real, it must be confirmed so by the greater populace. Television and the internet have changed our eye of life, whether for good or ill. Events in my life over the past few weeks seem so odd, even now, that the act of writing them down and publish it online may be the only way for it all to feel like more than a slide into delirium. In my living room, near the door that leads to my bedroom, there once hung a 3.5 by 5 feet oil painting. The artist was one William Cartwright, an obscure Wolverhampton native who, the owner told me, had died mysteriously in the early 1950s. I made the purchase at a garage sale for a princely sum of £10. The owner, a middle-aged man called Charles Franklin, must have been desperate to sell, considering the dilapidation of both his house and himself. The picture itself is a bucolic scene, as wholesome as a Rockwell and as verdant as a Matisse. It depicts a family picnic within a lush meadow, buttercups blooming around the gathering, a small copse of trees to the left, and rolling hills in the background. The weather is fair, and the subjects, mother, father, 3 rosy-cheeked children, are accoutred in post-war attire. On careful inspection, however, one can see a rather less cheerful detail, partially hidden behind. The foremost tree is another person, a drably clothed young man with a sour expression on his face. I only really saw it after I'd made the purchase, and it rather ruined the painting's main mood for me, though not enough that I didn't end up hanging it. Anyway, I bought it 6 weeks ago, and it was 1 week after that all this started. It was 6:30 in the evening, and I was returning to the living room from the bathroom when I noticed that the painting had been altered. Maybe it was set at a wrong angle. I inspected it and found it was hung perfectly straight. Nothing had changed within the frame either. The picnic still progressed merrily, and the dour youth still looked on with his back to the trees. I turned away, prepared and ate dinner, watched some fitfully funny sitcoms, and went to bed. I awoke in horror at 3:30 a.m. that morning, shivering and soaked with sweat. The riddle of the painting answered. I knew what had changed. The stranger, once partially obscured only a few hours before, was completely visible. The still life had moved. Over the next week, I kept a wary eye on the painting whenever I passed it. Sure enough, with each passing day the dark figure grew ever so slightly larger in comparison to the foregrounded figures, and as his features became clearer, I saw that his face wasn't so youthful or so angry either. Maybe it was a trick of the light, but sometimes his expression was more akin to a smile, albeit a sinister one. It wasn't just the painting either. Any horror movie I watched, whenever the monster paid at the screen, it seemed more vivid and threatening than before. Maybe it was my eyes unfocusing, but it seemed to me that the edges of the screen warped outward each time it happened. Every time I listened to music, I heard occasional murmuring, like somebody or something whispering the apocrypha of the damned. The backyard of my house always played host to small animals and birds, most of them visibly sickening, and as for the dreams, the less said the better. 2 weeks ago, a loud thump on the back door woke me up in the early morning. Eyes barely open, I staggered out to the living room to investigate the noise. The noise had been made by a crow dashing itself against the door, and its crumpled form lay quite dead in the wind-dawn light. With the aid of a plastic bag and considerable reluctance, I brought the corpse inside, went out to the street, and gave it a cursory burial in the nearest bin. I then changed and walked out to get that day's newspaper and a coffee from the corner store. Ensconced once more in my home, I received a mild shock several pages into my reading. An article, brief and embellished only with a grainy photograph, detailed the investigation of a suicide in the local area of one Charles Franklin. The picture was of a sunken-eyed, somewhat unkempt man fast approaching 60. The picture also matched the features of the previous owner of the Cartwright painting. An involuntary shiver spasmed between my shoulders, and I became ever more aware of the painting behind me. I had not inspected the progress of the dark figure yet, and so paced towards it, brackish dread filling my stomach with each step. I was right to dread. If anything, I wasn't scared enough. Nothing I've drunk since then can erase the image of that tranquil abomination contained within the frames. As usual, the menacing figure on the left had inched further into the foreground than the background now, and, as before, the family enjoy a frozen repast in the heatless sunlight. The familiarity, even that of the unfamiliar, had been intruded on twice, though. A bird hovered above the meadow, a bird with the dusky feather as of a crow, and in the mother's hands a baby, dark-eyed and somber, was cradled, even with the weight of years, hand wearing lifted. I knew I saw none other than the face of Charles Franklin. I've since covered the painting and sealed it in a cupboard in the spare room. Yet still I can sense it no matter where I am. It exudes a suffocating aura, instilling me with a leaden torpor no amount of caffeine can shake off. Many times I've thought of destroying the damned thing, yet whenever I endeavor to do so, fatigue overwhelms me, and I am left unable to rise from the floor. They advertised it for sale, but so far there hasn't been so much as a single phone call. I can't listen to music anymore. It's drowned out by horrendous babbling, a cacophony of obscenities and hatred. I don't watch movies either, or indeed anything. I looked into my bathroom mirror for the last time 5 days ago, and what stared back at me was the dark man's murderous leer. It took more courage than I care to admit just to switch this computer on. I do not know the nature of William Cartwright, or the nature of his painting, or the nature of the specter that haunts me. What kind of man was Cartwright? What kind of monster? How many paintings did he create before consigning his flesh to rot? Did his soul follow? It doesn't matter. Nothing matters now. All I know is that it has consumed me completely, like it consumed Charles and his family. The sounds of faint hammering drift from the spare room. May the padlock hold out, at least until the pills have rendered me oblivious. Farewell, dear reader. Story 2. Mapami Silent Zone. In July 1970, the U.S. military conducted a missile test in Green River, Utah. The missile, a multi-stage rocket, was loaded with a payload of 2 small containers, nominally containing radioactive cobalt-57. It was launched toward the White Sands Missile Range in New Mexico. However, The rocket malfunctioned somehow and T ended up crashing into the Mapami Preserve in Mexico. The U.S. government launched an investigation that took several weeks to find the rocket, build a road to the site, and haul out the wreckage. At least that's the story. How a rocket could overshoot its target by over 1.5 times its intended distance, when the fuel loads on missile tests are usually précis. Healy calculated as only the beginning of the problems. Cobalt-57 is a marker isotope, usually used for medical tests, not so much for missile tests. The missile being used was one that was used for launching test payloads, and not one that had any military application. Over the years since then, stories about that area where the rocket fell have surfaced the most. Prominent among these is the story that gives the area its nickname, the Silent Zone. Apparently, no radio waves can be received in certain areas surrounding the rocket's crash site. While areas devoid of radio signals are not unknown on Earth, most of these are the product of altitude and mountainous terrain combining with a lack of transmitters in the area. The Mapami Silent Zone is located in flat terrain with only small foothills surrounding it. Moreover, it is well within the range of several border blaster radio stations, known for highly boosted signals designed to carry them well into U.S. territory. None of these stations can be picked up in the Silent Zone. Not even static is present. Just dead silence across all radio bands until you leave these areas of radio void. Physical oddities are also present. Plants in some areas have taken on strange colorations, especially among certain breeds of desert plants. Bright purple or dark violet versions of cacti that are normally green have been found, along with strange, abnormally large growth patterns in scrub vegetation. The strange patterns are also prevalent in local animal species, with some tortoises in the area exhibiting triangular shell patterns, wild coyotes growing unusually large, and small desert lizards growing to sizes unheard of in other areas. Blood work done on these animals, and people living near the area showed signs of blood cells that exhibited unusual properties, including rounded, triangular structure. In some cases, the geology of the region is also highly unusual. Some pebbles and rocks in the Silent Zone feature an unusual content of rare metals, including ruthenium, rhodium, and most notably extremely trace amounts of technetium. These technetium traces are most startling because technetium is not a naturally occurring element, and almost all isotopes decay to ruthenium in a matter of seconds to minutes. The few pieces that Ave had a relatively stable isotope, technetium-97, indicate a wide array of origin dates. On their decay rates were analyzed, indicating no single event could have been the source. Strange magnetic fields plagued the area, causing compass needles to spin crazily. Ferrous rocks and pebbles can sometimes be seen to move, evidently being pulled by these magnetic anomalies. This leads into a discussion one of the most concerning aspects of the area, the unexplained activity in the region. Strange lights and unusual radio wave bursts have been observed in the zone. These lights and radio wave bursts occur both in the air above the Silent Zone and on the ground. Some people who have traveled to the area claim that they are subject to strange visions and auditory hallucinations during their time there. A small research station, originally located on the site as a biological research station, undergoes a very high rate of personnel turnover and desertion, sometimes including race. Urchers seemingly disappearing in the middle of shifts. No video evidence of these occurrences has ever made it into the public record, but in April 2013, scans of 100 journal pages turned up on several conspiracy and paranormal image boards. These pages were from a secret personal journal kept by a researcher named Hector Alvarez. In them, he chronicled the unusual phenomenon ESAW working alone on the graveyard shift at the station. He claims he started the journal after complaints about strange things he saw being ignored by higher-ups and attempts by him to document them with a digital camera had been unsuccessful due to some malfunction of the memory of the system. The journal itself chronicles about 3 months of activity and detail multiple phenomena. Minor phenomena included some of those previously outlined. Additionally, he noted strange wind and barometric pressure readings on the station's weather sensors. These indicated extreme weather conditions despite the observable weather was nothing out of the ordinary. Unusual discolorations of the paint, both inside and outside the building, would occur seemingly at random. There was no pattern to the color or location of these discolorations, but they would always be vaguely triangular in shape. Some of the disturbances he reported were more severe. These included had a few sightings, strange glowing triangles. He was unable to give an exact size, but he said that they appeared to be the same size each time, roughly 6 feet on a side. These triangles would appear suddenly, often accompanied by odd sounds and rushes of air. These triangles were described as having borders of prismatic colored fire, while the interior of these triangles would contain in translucent, undulating bands of shifting colors, with Alvarez noting he felt that there was a pattern to these shifts, though he did not know why he felt this way. These triangles would remain in existence for several minutes before disappearing, with the same odd sounds and atmospheric disturbances as their arrival. Though he only recorded seeing half a dozen of these triangles, he noted that all of them appeared to be equilateral, and all of them were either tilted at a 15 or 105-degree angle, seeming to imply an unseen, regular pattern. He also detailed an event where the speakers of all the computers in the station suddenly began to blast a strange, garbled white noise, despite the computers being off. This broadcast continued even after the speakers were unplugged from the computer the next day. Several of these computers would not turn on, and when tasked with repairing them, the technician claimed the motherboards and hard drives looked like they had melted under extreme heat. The journal ends abruptly. After 3 months, officials at the Mapami Preserve had no comment on the matter, other than to say Mr. Alvarez had apparently left his post the night of March 15, 2013, and did not return the following night for his shift. They had since referred the matter to the local police, whose investigation turned up no leads. Their investigation did turn up to interesting facts. First, Mr. Alvarez's car was still at the research station the morning after he disappeared. Second, a large triangular discoloration on the wall discovered the next morning was found to be emitting trace amounts of radiation When analyzed in a lab, the surface of the wall was found to contain technetium isotopes. The amounts of the isotopes present would place their time of origin at roughly the night Mr. Alvarez disappeared. Story 3. If you see spots when you close your eyes, ignore them. I am terrified of sleep. Or, more accurately, what occurs when I do ... For as long as I can remember, I have seen spots when I sleep. More precisely, I see them when I close my eyes to go to sleep. Between the second I start closing my eyes and when they are entirely shut, I see two, one in each eye. It never used to bother me, and I only see them for a split second, so there is not much time to dwell on their appearance. That is, until about a month ago, when everything changed. It was a Friday night, and I was exhausted from a long week of work. I was closing my eyes to get some shut-eye when I saw the all-too-familiar spots in my vision. It was then I began to wonder what had caused the condition for all these years, and I opened and closed my eyes several times, paying attention. But when the orbs appeared each time, I then grabbed my phone from the nightstand to do some research on my condition. I didn't find anything specific about the spots appearing when people closed their eyes, but I did find some information about the strange shapes that can be seen when the eyes are already shut, writing it off as a small visual oddity due to the process of closing my eyes in the dark. I decided it was nothing to be alarmed about and went to sleep. After several nights of paying more attention to the phenomenon, it occurred to me that the spots seemed to have grown in size since I began usually observing them. However, I was not overly concerned, as I figure it was just the anomaly continuing to be quirky. About a week after I had first decided to research my condition in earnest, I had a realization as I closed my eyes that sent shivers down my spine. The spots that I had been thinking about for the past week had taken on the shape of eyes. Human eyes. I snapped my eyes open again, but saw nothing at all. It was just me in my room, safely locked in my apartment for the night. I told myself that as it was just a visual hallucination, it made sense that my mind would create a familiar shape for me to see. Closing my eyes once again and trying not to notice the eye-shaped spots, I fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. I went about my business the next day the same as usual. I drove to work, spent 8 hours writing out menial documents for the corporate higher-ups, and then drove home. I did ask a few co-workers whether they had ever seen strangely shaped spots in their eyes when they fell asleep, but none of them had had the same experience as me. When I got home, I ate dinner by myself, watched a few episodes of The Office, and then headed to bed as I began to tire of scrolling through social media. I placed my phone back onto my bedside table and prepared for some much-needed rest. When I did, I saw the instantly recognizable eyes staring back at me. As usual, they vanished the moment my eyes closed completely, and then it happened. I felt the flow of soft, warm air over my face. I quickly opened my eyes and looked around the room. Nothing. I tried to rationalize the occurrence as a random warm breeze, caused perhaps by my heater turning on unexpectedly. However, I knew that I had not heard the furnace start, nor did I have my window open that night. I know what I felt. It was exactly like a breath. Over the next few weeks, the experience continued, the spots came closer on ever before, and every couple of nights I sensed the same unexplained gust of warmth. Then, one Tuesday night, I saw the spots wink out of existence for a fraction of a second and then return, as if they were blinking the day it happened. I had stayed overtime at work, with a department deadline fast approaching. When I got home, I only had the energy to make myself some toast beef, or crawling into bed, I saw the spots staring back at me in the dark before I shut my eyes and attempted to fall asleep despite my unease. I noticed that familiar rush of humid air moving over my face, making me all the more restless. Then I felt it again. In an instant, all the things that I had once told myself to help me sleep at night were moot. I could no longer rationalize the incidents as a random breeze. I opened my eyes. Staring back at me through the darkness was a pair of eyes. They were humanoid in appearance, yet the creature they were at a chit was decidedly alien. It had no nose, and its mouth, twisted into a vast, gaping smile, was far broader than humanly possible. Its face was only a foot from mine. Right off of the edge of the bed, I was frozen in fear, unable to move or think. For a few moments I did nothing but stare at it, and it never took its eyes off me. Then its grin widened further. I was jolted from my fear-induced paralysis as it began to reach toward me with one of its grotesque, distorted appendages. I leapt from the bed and ran past it toward the door. As I did, it turned its head 180 degrees, like something out of The Exorcist, and followed me with its gaze. I grabbed the keys to my car and sprinted through the front door. I took the stairs, jumping entire flights at a time to get out as quickly as possible. After making it safely to my vehicle, I drove for an hour before I finally began. Rational thoughts returned to my mind. I called the police and informed them that someone had broken into my apartment and had been watching me sleep. I left out the part about its monstrous, inhuman features, as I had no intention of ending up in a psych ward. After what I'd experienced, I was certain of what I had seen, and it was not human. Predictably, the police found nothing of interest in my apartment. No signs of forced entry, fingerprints, or any other evidence of the kind. They told me that I should stay out of my apartment until they finished their investigation, and I moved back in with my mother one town over. I realized later that the intruder must have been watching me sleep for years, and that those spots had been it opening its eyes to look at me once I closed mine. Looking back on all the previous years, well, before I ever paid attention to the spots, it dawned on me that this creature had only begun to make itself known to me after I had taken notice of its existence and started to pry. I can still feel its breath when I sleep. If you see spots when you close your eyes, ignore them. Story 4. Coal mines. There isn't much to do around Westbrook, our shitty little town in the Appalachian Mountains. The town itself only has a population of 2,000, and most of them work in the Davidson coal mine in the eastern half of town. My dad used to work there. Before the accident, he died of sulfur poisoning down in what the workers call the gate, the deepest part of the mine. They couldn't even get his body. It was too deep in the hole. All they know is that after he died, the level of the mine where he died had extremely high sulfur levels. It's all right, though. I was only around 6 when it happened, so I don't remember much. Just my sister was crying and my older bro. They're arguing with my mother about him taking Dad's old job. We needed some source of income, and my mother is a small, timid woman, not fit for the mines. So my brother picked up the miner's helmet, and we started to recover. Over time, the memory of my father slowly faded from my memory, until, of course, my brother met his fate in that dreaded mine. It was a cold October day, and a cold May. Saint was rolling down the mountains. I was off school because I had the flu, so I was still home when my brother was leaving. He told me to start boiling some water for dinner, but I forgot and just ate in bed and drifted back to sleep. I woke to my mother's weeping and my sister's angry screams. I went over into the kitchen, and my mother told me the whole story. He died of sulfur poisoning in the gate, and they weren't able to get his body. We had our little attempt at a funeral, and we tried to move on again. That was about 2 years ago, and now I'm of age to work in the mine. It's my first day, and I hope it goes well. I pick up my helmet, and I head out the door. Before I can leave, my mother hands me a small gas mask. I take it from her and observe it. It's an old World War I mask, and it likely doesn't even work anymore, but we're still very poor, and it's the best we can do. I walk across the yard and into town. It's extremely foggy today. I can't even see the tops of the mountains. The children are racing around the streets, decorating for Halloween. Finally, I reach the mine. I converse with the other workers for a few minutes before the elevator to the mine reaches us. We climb in, and they press one. We start to descend slowly at first, but then faster and faster. We reach level 1, and everyone climbs out. I remember my mask and decide to put it on before I step off the platform. While I'm fiddling with the straps, I hear the elevator doors slam shut. That's all right, I think to myself. I might get scolded for being late, but it's my first day. They'll forgive me. But then the elevator starts to go down. I look at the level counter. January 2nd, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, level 8, the gate, the doors creak open. I frantically press the level 1 button, but nothing happens. I hear voices coming from the shadows outside. Hoping they're fellow miners, I step out and try to find them. Slam. The elevator shuts with a bang. I raise my oil lamp and start to look for the miners. I'm surrounded by red rocks, somewhat hot to the touch. I follow the voices into a small subsection of the cave. I raise my lamp and look at the walls. Scratch marks, and lots of them. The voices are nearby. I call out to them. My reply is frantic breathing and breathless laughter. I start to backtrack to the elevator, but a rock falls in front of my path. I slide down into a small crevice, hoping to find another way around. I look up from my current position and see strange orange lights, perfectly circular. Maybe they sent some miners to look for me. I crawl up the hill and approach the lights. I lift my lamp to the lights. In front of me stands a creature about 5 feet tall, blackish red in color. The skin appears to be coarse and thick. 2 small goat-like horns protrude from the head. 5-foot-long claws hang lazily from its hands. It grins, its teeth are serrated, its face oddly human in structure. Before I can run, it slices my leg, and I fall. A small pool of blood is forming at my legs. The creature stands over me and slices the gas mask's felt. And too, I scramble desperately away, managing to crawl in another subsection of the cave. My legs are losing a lot of blood and my vision starts to become hazy. What was that thing? It seemed so human, yet so different at the same time. I hear its claws scrape the rocks outside. It's getting closer. I've got to find a way out. I see another opening into the main chamber and start crawling over to it. My vision is failing me and I'm becoming extremely lightheaded. But I reach the opening and the elevator is right before me, doors wide open. I use all the rest of my strength and pull myself onto the platform and press the service button. The door shuts hard, and I hear the engine start to rev up. Suddenly, a flash of light blinds me even more. The wire to the power pole X has been cut. The lights in the elevator have gone out, but I can see their eyes coming closer. There's at least 10 of them now, laughing hysterically, thinking they've found their next key. Lines, their claws scrape the metal door to the elevator, trying desperately to rip the small holes wider so they can get it. But I am safe in here, and soon the others will discover my absence and SCND help. I raise my lamp up to the door and try to get a closer look at the creatures. Their eyes are about 3 inches wide and 4 inches tall. The eyes are completely orange with no discernible pupae. They have no nose I can see, just 2 small slits in its face. Right below the eyes, smoke seems to come out of them. They stop clawing at the door and stand back. Maybe they've given up. One of the creatures approaches the door. It is significantly larger than the other ones, and its face has a scar going across the length of it. The beast grips the door and looks me in the eyes, furious at my resiliency. I am very close to passing out from blood loss. The world around me is spinning, but I stay awake. Its grip tightens on the door and it closes its eyes. He slit below the eyes close up, and you wouldn't even be able to tell that they were there. Then it rears its head back and breathes a cloud into my face, sulfur. Story 5. Arrival. I met Cassie for the first time when I started high school. She was in my art class, and the teacher, Miss Perez, was always giving her a hard time. She was talented, but lacked motivation, was what she used to say. Cass, I didn't seem to care, and seemed more focused on whatever music was blasting in her earphones than on her art assignments. We started talking and found out we were both interested in the same kind of music. I had played the piano for a couple of years, and she was taking guitar lessons. We both dabbled in songwriting, and it didn't take long for us to join forces to start a band together. There were only the 2 of us in it, but we were young and mostly just spending our time daydreaming about making it big. Something changed in the middle of our sophomore year. Her family had been away over the holidays, and when we met again in January, I could tell that something was off. She looked tired in a way I'd never seen her before, and she seemed unfocused. I asked her about it, and she just told me that she'd been having trouble sleeping. I kept prodding, and Cassie described having weird dreams of traveling through vast, empty spaces. They weren't nightmares, as she weren't scared, but when she woke up in the morning she didn't feel rested either. Days passed, and she didn't get better. In fact, every morning the bags under her eyes seemed deeper in hue, and nothing could hold her attention for very long. except for art class. Looking at her as she was then, it was hard to imagine it being the same Cassie I'd seen roll her eyes at Miss Perez in our first year. As soon as she got a brush or pencil in her hand, suddenly she came to life again. It was amazing to watch her as she worked, filling canvas after canvas with force and precision. Her paintings were like if Pollock had been an astrophysicist, bringing you into a different world as a lone explorer. From darkness and emptiness came lights, worlds, destruction, and silence. I was impressed, as everyone seemed to be. But I worried about her. There was something I couldn't help but notice that troubled me about her painting, her expression. While writing songs and playing guitar, creating out of joy, she was always leaving a trace of herself in it. Watching her paint, I didn't feel that. I felt determination, urgency, and fear. In our senior year, Cassie got offered a scholarship to some art school. She didn't have a lot of options. Her dedication to painting and listless approach to anything else meant her grades had dropped significantly. I asked her if she intended to take it, and she shrugged and said that it didn't matter. I urged her to go, telling her that she had a real talent, and that I knew she could make it big like we used to talk about. She looked at me then, the tiredness in her eyes bringing a hint of nostalgia to the surface and a ghost of a smile. I hadn't seen her smile for so long, no matter how little. As graduation neared, Cassie told me that she was having a showing of her art. She'd found the perfect place and wanted me to help her set everything up after school. She brought me to a small, abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of our district. It was pretty clear that no one in their right mind would think that the place was fit to act as a gallery, but Cassie didn't seem deterred. Were we trespassing? I asked her as we headed back to the car. Yes, she answered, but it's important. We spent the next week driving back and forth between the school and the warehouse. A few days before graduation, she asked me not to come anymore. She told me that she was grateful for my help, but that she needed to finish installing the pieces on her own. When the rain comes, meet me here was the last thing she said before we parted ways. I wondered what she was talking about. The forecast had said that it was likely to remain sunny for at least a week. I didn't ask, but I wish I had. She didn't come to school those last few days. We were listening to the principal speak when the first drops started falling. The skies had turned a dark gray, and thunder rolled in the distance. The wind was picking up, and a few graduates shouted as their hats blew away. As the rain intensified, they started moving the rest of the ceremony inside. I got up from my seat with the others, but headed further out as they headed, and the weather got worse by the minute it seemed, and I started running to my car. Cassie's words were ringing in my ears, and I couldn't help but feel that something was horribly wrong. When I arrived at the warehouse, it was a full-blown storm. The rain seemed almost horizontal because of the wind, and by the time I got inside, I was soaked to the skin. "Cassie," I called out into the darkness, but I received no answer. In the light coming in through the door, I could see lit candles set up in a line. I closed the door behind me and walked toward the flickering lights. As I separated myself from the tempest outside, I started to make out the trail Cassie had made for me, candles set up to illuminate the right path along the story she wanted to tell. I started walking at a slow pace between her paintings, letting her guide me. Before, I'd only ever seen her paintings as individual works, with a common theme. Seeing them this way, lined up in their proper order, it became clear that they were much more than that. They were a journey. As I passed from one work to the next, I felt as I was traveling across some vast expanse of space. Through the deep of our universe, I saw solar systems, galaxies, stars, planets pass me by. I saw world after world collapse and be day. Troy, leaving fragments and moving on to the next. It was both amazing and terrifying. I wandered along the journey Cassie took me through when something started to dawn on me. Recognition. This was no longer just a brilliant visualization of the enormousness of space. It had a final destination. I felt myself grow cold. For each painting I passed, I grew more certain of what I would find at the end. I gazed up at the wall bearing Cassie's. I had picked her up, but felt somehow how far away from me she was. I wondered if she'd ever wake up again. Before it came, looking due. When on us from each canvas were the remnants of the destruction it would leave behind. She had truly done a masterful job of capturing the end. Story 6. Freak. The freak meandered through a group of the undead. It was nearing nightfall, and he began to head back home. His pack had plenty of food in it, and he shouldn't have to leave his house again for another week or so, unless one of the zombie bastards punched its way in again. He didn't carry a gun anymore. He had figured out a while ago that they couldn't see him. It wasn't necessary for him to carry a gun, because if they did realize he was there, he would be dead long before he could pull out any kind of weapon whatsoever. He did have to carry a weapon in the earlier days, back when he was normal, back before he became a freak. The people back then would try to steal food from him, attack him in delirious, starving rages. He killed quite a few people in self-defense, but managed to detach himself from emotions. If he had he would be dead right now or insane. He was free of the burden of emotions now, and all he ever felt was contentment. He used to be afraid. He used to hate himself, but now there was no reason for either. He hated himself for not being normal. He used to be normal, but now he was just a freak in a sea of normalcy. He was only content, not feeling too strongly towards positive or negative emotions. In the early days, the infected, the zombies, the monster, the ghouls, the beasts were the minority. They were the freaks. They were the repulsive ones. Now it was him. He was the freak. He was one of the last of his kind. He was the last of his kind he had seen in some time now. When the virus first hit, it wasn't that big of a deal. Just a few hurriedly covered stories in the local news, stuff like that. It wasn't close to home at all. It was in little jungle villages in Africa. But it spread quickly. This sickness was spread through the air. Coughs, sneezes, bodily contact. It all spread the disease. The symptoms were subtle, and by the time you died and returned, it was too late. Far too late. When they first started to attack, when he first became a freak, he was with a few more like him, hunted. They all stowed themselves away in a child's treehouse. They had pulled the ladder up behind them, but they knew where the freaks were. They always knew. They were sitting, waiting. There were 7 freaks in the treehouse total, cramped, moist, afraid. A few of them had guns. and were firing wildly at the remains below. The freaks with guns were panicked, didn't know how to shoot, and didn't know to shoot for the brain. They were out of ammo, and they had only destroyed one. The reanimated, shuffling men couldn't see. Their eyes were either closed, film over, or missing. They smelled, felt vibrations through the air, heard or maybe some unknown new sense. Nobody knew. It didn't matter. You were dead if you weren't immune. If you were immune, they couldn't sense you in whatever way it was they used. But if you touched them, they would feel you. They would feel your warmth, and he would take it away. One of the monsters in the treehouse wasn't immune, the rest were. The one who wasn't immune was showing symptoms already, and they all knew it. They planned to push him on sometime soon, but he was too overactive right now. They had watched as he shot up on heroin a few minutes ago. He was too violent and unpredictable now. His rifle was now firing dry. He kept pulling back the bolt and firing anyways. Crazy bastard. The plan was to push him down when the opportunity was there, distract the reliving enough for the rest of them to get away. They didn't know how smart the undead were yet, though. About 20 minutes later, he had finally begun to crash. 3 of them exchanged a glance and shoved him down. He hit the ground with a sickening crunch, and the undead closest to him stood up, walked over, broke his neck, delivered a swift blow to his skull, and left him there. That was when the monsters realized how smart the undead were. Maybe not completely genius, but they knew. They had killed the addict and destroy his brain to make sure he wouldn't come back. They needed the food, after all. They had heard TWO rifles firing at once, and knew from experience a man could only fire one at once. They knew there was at least one other up there, probably more. They were surrounding the tree, waiting. The survivors were at a loss. I think I know what to do, a small, 40-ish balding man piped. He was still wearing a button-up shirt and khaki pants, but he had ditched his dress shoes long ago. They only slowed him down. Everybody turned to him as one. I think, since they can't see us, we could maybe go down and try to sneak through. A few of us won't make it, but it's a better chance than we would have. They had all died but the freak. Now he was alone and was glad. If he saw another survivor, he would probably kill it in disgust. And he had done it before. A few months ago, he had found one more survivor dying of dehydration. He slit his throat. They couldn't be spared to live, and now this. He had just mounted a crest to see at 20 immune people hiking down the highway. He grimaced. The freak reached into his pocket. Do not suffer a monster to live. He pulled forth a well-made pipe bomb. He had made it over the course of a week. Why hurry when he had all the time in the world? Then began to tromp down the hill, holding his hands high in a gesture of peace. They were all overjoyed to meet another like them. There was a child with them, but the rest were either middle-aged or in their early 20s. He awaited an opportunity to use his weapon, but none arose until later that night. And he didn't even need the lighter. There was a fire in the middle of the camp, and they were all sleeping. They had rigged up an alarm system consisting of soda cans on a string. They all slept soundly. He stepped outside limits of the camp and pitched a pipe bomb towards the fire. It detonated almost immediately. He ran from the blast of heat and smiled. He had stopped them from trying to overturn the world. How the world worked. They were reorganizing. That was not allowed. He had ended them all. He giggled and headed back home. Story 7. Nighttime Curiosity. Gradually, I check the clock beside my bed and grimace. It's 0:21 already, which means only a maximum of 6.5 hours sleep for me now. Great. I close my eyes tight and urge my mind to shut off. But it is, as reluctant as always, my consciousness remains occupied with disconcerting thoughts. To try and subside my paranoid deliberations, I drag my funfair trophy towards me in a tight embrace. The now somewhat craggy bear, easily the size of an older child, had been won at the town's annual fair for me by my father 8 years ago. It had taken a tedious amount of whining and crocodile tears in my behalf for him to keep trying. After a total investment of £12, the bear was mine, and I had kept it in my bed ever since. In troublesome nights, when I found myself consumed in nightmarish fantasies, the bear always brought some kind of a comfort. It was always cold, which was somehow pleasing within the warmth of the duvet, and, despite the fact that its fur was now matted and unkempt, it was always cozy to cuddle with, even when I wasn't. Hugging it, the bear would sleep under the duvet beside me, and during the night I'd be able to feel its coldness beside me. I never felt alone in the bed, and now, in the early hours of the morning, I cling to it like a child. The familiarity of the odd, fairly unpleasant smell it has acquired over the years calms my frantic mind, and I feel myself slipping into sleep within minutes. Half asleep, half aware, I feel a movement beside me, a gentle tug of the duvet. It is enough to widen my eyes and quicken my heartbeat. I find my vision locked on the wall opposite me. Suddenly, my heartbeat slows to a near stop as fear soars through every inch of my body. Two words can be read, albeit distorted and indistinct, but visible. All the same, don't look. Beneath the writing was a downwards pointing arrow, which indicated to only one logical location. The sight of the grotesque scrawling sends a sharp shiver along the length of my spine as my brain feverishly searches for a rational explanation for what I am seeing. For many nights now it had happened, this exact situation. I would awake in the vacant darkness, and the only thing I would be able to see was the message. It would never be there when the sun surfaced from the horizon, but I'm confident to say that, on all of the occasions, I was not asshole. It has happened frequently over the past few years. A strange feeling of movement from within the bed would pull me from sleep, and then I'd see it each time. A theoretical battle between curiosity and irrationality would transpire in my subconscious, and irrationality remained champion. Until tonight I feel more compelled than ever to just look, to just valiantly climb out from the bed, fill the room with light, and put my mind at ease. The knowledge that there is nothing under there would surely resolve my spurt of insomnia. And yet I am still reluctant. A typical childhood is spent fearing the endless forms of monster that could be lying under your bed, concealed in the gloom, embracing the obscurity of the shadows. Such a fear becomes embedded in the darkest regions of the mind, and even now I daren't put my legs over the edge of the bed in case something wraps its cold, slender fingers around them. The distance from the bed to the light switch isn't long, but in the dark it would be an eternity. I'm going for it. Oh God, I'm out of the bed, and my legs are monster hand free. I pause to admire my fearlessness. Before taking small, quiet steps towards the wall, I take about 4. Before another sound rivals the creak off the floor, the bed creaks. A subtle sound, but audible enough to freeze me completely. The headroom has long outlived its prime time, and so the bars underneath are weak, so weak that even the slightest movement can be heard. It creaks again, louder this time, as if weight air shifting from one position to another. Suddenly there is a scratching sound, pointed nails against metal, slow, loud, terrifying. I find a sudden energy within me to move my feet once more, big strides this time. The scratching sound does not subside. It is now accompanied by raspy, deep breaths. Each inhale sounds like a struggle for air. The exhale is silent. As I near wall, the volume increases, and it seems to get closer. What appeared to have emanated from the bed now shadows me as I fumble in the eerie black for the light switch. Come on, I urge, adamant that I do not stand alone in this room. The uncomfortable feeling of being watched strikes me from all directions, and I cannot escape it. Something vindictive lurks, and it is waiting. My fingers finally locate the switch, and I press it without delay, spinning as I do to face the now lit room, empty. The wall is barren, the bed unharmed. The outline of the BEAR beneath the duvet is apparent, but of no concern. I sigh with both relief and frustration at my own imagination. Now I can settle this stupid situation and finally get some rest. The clock reads 02:49. I move towards the bed with courage, now protected by light, and drop down to my knees so that I can see underneath it. And there, at the far side of the floor, alone and partly concealed by the dark, is my bear. What a comforting sight. I quickly drop onto my belly and drag myself underneath to grab the bear. I get about halfway under when realization hits me like a ton of bricks. If my bear is underneath the bed, then what is in it? At this point, the creaking restarts. I can feel the weight above me on the bed. The horrifying sound moves from the rickety side of the bed to the left. Silence then falls upon the room. I can barely breathe. I see a shadow be cast beside me. Round, like a head, it's looking at me. Biting my lip, I turn my head so that I can see what I have been sharing my bed with every night. I see the monstrosity that I have wrapped my arms around so tightly for comfort in times of fear, and it grins a satisfied grin with its grisly teeth hanging from the edge of the bed. With pure black eyes that lock with mine, it whispers to me in an icy, malicious voice, for simple words you shouldn't have looked, and with that it slithers from the bed and onto the ground, onto its hairy stomach. It crawls to join me under the bed, and I feel its familiar coldness press against my body once more. It wraps its foul arms around my torso, presses its grisly lips against my ear, and sneers. Oh, how the tables have turned. And with that I drift into eternal sleep.